Welcome to this video all about installing droplet computing to a Chromebook. The first part of the process is enabling something called Linux Beta, or what was once known as Project Christini. Quite typically in the world of Google, things can be around for some years marked as beta. That's not to suggest that they aren't good or reliable pieces of software. Gmail was a beta for more than a decade and is now a dominant email platform. So to install the Linux Beta, I need to go to the settings on this Chromebook under Linux Beta and turn it on. Click Next and then give it a friendly name. I tend to use something that is generic, like Droplet for the username for the Linux environment. That way, when a terminal is opened, it says Droplet on the Linux Beta. It could be a person's name, it really doesn't matter. 7.5 gig is a little bit on the small size for us. I've got a disk that's quite large on my Chromebook, so I'm going to set it around the middle point, so I've got a kind of equal amount of storage in the Linux environment as I would have in the physical environment. It's entirely up to you whereabouts you put this widget, but as I mainly run Droplet containers on this Chromebook, I need to give myself a hefty bit of space for all the images I like. I then choose Install. What happens in this process is Google are downloading a tiny version of Linux based on Debian Buster currently, and once downloaded, it then starts that Linux virtual machine, and then inside that we can install our software and our Droplet container. Obviously this takes a little bit of time to download from the internet, so I'll pause the video at this point and resume it a little bit later. So that's the Linux Beta installed and enabled, and it's created a prompt for us. We don't really need this terminal open for us to do the work we need to do, although I will probably come back to it to do some editing of text files later in this video. One thing to mention about the Linux Beta is some of the advanced settings. So for example, you can share folders between various devices, between the Chromebook environment and the Linux environment. You might not want to share your local storage, but I imagine a lot of people will actually want to have access to their Google Drive. Now, by doing this particular configuration, we can actually make the Google Drive appear in the Droplet container as well. That means Windows applications can be run natively on the Chromebook without any need for network access. It's completely offline, but still have access to their Google Drive to save and retrieve files, which can be synced later. There is some modest support for USB devices. Typically, this is things like memory sticks and things like it. It's not a huge amount of USB support in the Linux Beta. Backup and restore can be an excellent deployment process. You can back up the entire Linux Beta environment, which would include Droplet, and then also use it as a way of deploying by using the restore feature that entire environment to a clean new Chromebook. So that's the Linux Beta enabled. Next thing I'm going to do is copy some files around. In the Linux files area, this is blank. But I will need software in this context and various files to do the next particular job. So I've got a bunch of different folders that I use to separate out my storage. I've got some images and license files and a couple of different zip files that contain various images. Copying files to the Linux files is very easy. For a small file, it takes nanoseconds. And I'm going to copy our software to that Linux location as well. I don't strictly need to do that, but I kind of like to have all the files in one location. These files are zipped up and are obviously going to take some time to copy across. So what I will do is copy these files across and pause the video at this point, because obviously you don't want to watch status bars as I do a file copy. So I'm going to copy a droplet image, a clean one, to the Linux files location. And I'll resume this video once that copy has completed. Right then, so that copy process has completed. If I just do a refresh here, you can see the droplet file is in that folder. I'm going to right-click the .deb file and ask it to be installed with Linux Beta. So this is how you install additional applications into the Linux Beta environment. Essentially, I'm installing our Linux version of our software into a special location in the Chromebook that allows Linux applications to function. Again, this takes a little bit of time, but it shouldn't take too long, and the installation has completed. If I just open up the tray here, you'll see that I have a droplet icon for the application, which I can load up. And the first thing it's going to ask me is to provide my license file. So I'm going to choose yes to that, browse to home, there's my license file, and accept the license agreement. Okay, so that's the software installed. An important thing to look out for when you're working with the Chromebook Edition is you should be looking for the word KVM in this help and about information for the available hardware acceleration. KVM, or being able to access the Intel VT attributes of the processor, does improve performance. A word of warning, you do get some high-powered Chromebooks with a lot of memory, a lot of CPU and a big disk, but they may be using an old kernel within Chromebook, which doesn't allow the Intel VT attributes to be displayed. If in doubt, consult your OEM provider or do some digging around on Google, where you'll find lots of sources telling you which different types of Chromebooks have the special bit in the boot process that exposes Intel VT. Now the app is open. If you watched a couple of these videos, the configuration is very much the same. I need to allocate a certain quantity of memory and CPU to the container, and I also need to enable hardware acceleration. How much you allocate in terms of memory and CPU is entirely based on really the footprint of your applications. The minimum for the container I'm going to use is 1 CPU and 2 gig of RAM, but you don't necessarily want to run with the minimums in all cases. Yeah. So you are looking at a decent Chromebook, not a Celeron processor with 32 gig worth of storage and next to nil memory. So you're talking about the mid-range, high-end Chromebooks in terms of having enough resources to do this. So the next thing I need to do is browse for the image file. There it is. And I can start the container for the first time. This takes about 30 seconds to 50 seconds. It depends on the hardware and the spec. Certainly CPU, memory, clock speeds, the quality of the underlying disk infrastructure will make a difference in terms of the time it takes to start up. But I'll pause the video at this time so you don't have to watch these steps as it starts up. Okay, well, the container has started, and what you're seeing here is our application tile interface with a single app to launch what we call the Droplet Shell. This is a highly customized environment from which within the Windows application runs. So let's launch the Droplet Shell for the first time. So that's Droplet Shell loaded. It's a very redacted kind of environment. You can still customize this though. We've put the bare minimum restrictions into the shell environment to make it usable. But you're open to customize the shell, add shortcuts, remove logos, change colors, do whatever you like, impose group policies, whatever you wish to do in this particular environment. It's merely a starting point. So my next task is going to be to install some software into the Droplet Shell. So I'm going to run Explorer. And as this Chromebook is wired to my home network and is connected to my NAS, I should be able to gain access to my file server from within the container itself. There we go. On my network, I have got a repository of software that I often use in demos. Now, in this particular case, I'm actually going to install an ancient version of Microsoft Office into the environment. Although we are able to run modern apps as well. We can run modern applications in Droplet Shell. A most common use case that we have found is customers who've gone all the way into Google Cloud and are trying to basically get rid of Windows wherever they can. But what's stymieing that process is some legacy application that stops them from getting rid of Windows in the desktop environment and kind of stops the process of, going Google all the way in its tracks. Occasionally we meet customers who want to run modern applications, but it's in the main legacy applications, and that's why I've picked this ancient version of Microsoft Office. So this part of the video is not going to be very interesting. It's going to be involving basically watching me install a version of Office which is now some 17 or more years old. But it'll give you an idea of how you can practically throw anything at the container in terms of software, and it should just work. Okay, so I'll resume this video once this installation has completed. Okay, well, that installation has completed successfully, so I can click Finish. On the hard drive of the container, if I have a look at the Microsoft Office folder, I can see that applications have been dumped there. So somewhere in here, there'll be a copy of Word. And I can customize that for the end user, moving the toolbars around, perhaps changing the view options a little bit to have the sort of page width view, which is a little bit nicer to read. And maybe I don't like those legacy pop-up startup panes. I just want the application to load straight away without any annoying pop-ups like that. Once an application is running, it's very easy to pin the application to the task bar. And I can just move that guy over there. And I can do the same really for Excel. I find Excel on this list, run the app, get rid of the annoying title bar, sort out my toolbars, get rid of the annoying startup pane, pin that to the taskbar, and then last app, our all important PowerPoint, because your users have a requirement for opening up PowerPoint from 2003 apparently. How strange the world is that we live in. And again, I will get rid of the startup pane, slightly different looking dialog box, and pin that to the taskbar as well. So we can create quite a neat little setup here. I'm able, if I wanted to remove these buttons. This power button, I don't really need that because I've got other ways now of shutting down the container. And I don't really necessarily need to give the users access to Explorer. If all they want to run is run an application and open a file, why give them Explorer? I said earlier that the security tools and the security framework of Windows is still in place. So if you need to get to things like regedit, for example, we haven't removed that. That's there. You can run regedit. And also, if you want to use the local policy to bolt down the container, you can do. We even support joining the container to the domain. So if you've still got an AD environment for legacy purposes, you could join the container to the domain and bolt it down even further with your corporate GPOs. Okay, so that's installing an application into the container. What I'm going to do is log out of the container. And I'm going to shut down the container now, and I'm going to show you some advanced settings that are accessible from the terminal window. So I can be making those changes while that is shut down. If I open up a terminal, in a hidden directory in Linux, there is a config folder, and you'll also find in there a droplet folder. And the files here that are listed correspond very much to the other versions of our software. Every version of our software has a credentials file, an apps.json file, a settings file, and so on. And what that allows me to do is turn on some of our advanced features. Now, we don't support all the redirection features that are available in the in our product. That's mainly because Chromebook represents a highly secured environment where sometimes these things aren't even available to the Linux beta. And if it's not available to the Linux beta, it's not available to the container. So I'm turning on the bidirectional clipboard here and the redirect drives. And what that will do is obviously give us copy and paste function between the container and any other app running in the Chromebook. But also the redirect drives will give us access to the Chrome drive that was shared as part of the Linux beta. So that means from the Windows environment, from the Droplet container environment, end users will be able to open up a file or create a file in a legacy version of Excel, for example, and save that to the cloud. So that preserves the model of Chromebook where the device is just a dumb device that provides an operating space. You should be able to brick this device for whatever reason and reset it without fear that you're going to destroy data, because no data is being held on the actual system itself. So I'll save that file. I'm using Nano here, which is not the most friendliest of text editors if you are a non-Linux person. If you're a Windows person who's coming to Chromebook, I'd heartily recommend something like Nano, which wasn't there in my system because I hadn't installed it. It's very much like the old DOS editor from days gone by. So I'm going to start the container again. Hopefully you'll be able to see the changes that I'm making. Probably the most noticeable one will be the access to the Google Drive. So again, I'll pause the video here while I wait for the container to load. So that's the container loaded, and I'm going to launch Droplet Shell again. And if I launch Explorer, you might notice that I have Google Drive on Penguin. Now, Penguin is the code name for the Linux shell. This can be changed to be a more friendly name, such as Google on my Chromebook. It can be modified if you need to. I've just gone with the defaults there. Yeah. But what that shows is I've got from within the Droplet Shell environment access to the Chromebook to save and retrieve files. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful, give you an idea of what's possible on a Chromebook. You can run your legacy and modern applications on a modern Chromebook device and extend the functionality of the Chromebook environment in a way that's compatible, secure, and compliant. Thank you for watching the video.